Have a good day?
Hope so.
Well, you're after pollock.
Also, anything goes.
Hope you have a good day. So, I think we will. Good morning, Barry.
Good morning, Ted. Here for you.
For the sunshine?
Yes, it is, yeah. Yes.
Is it going to be a good day?
Well, the forecast is a little bit up and down. A little bit on the high side last night. It's down a little bit this morning, so I think we've got to go and try and see what we do.
Great. Look forward to it. Morning.
Morning.
I thought I was going to be really late this morning. The traffic was bad. Never mind. Well, here we are at Plymouth. Always enjoy coming here. It's a glorious place, isn't it? It's a big fishing port just over here. We have the MAKIN. It has one of the biggest fleets in the West Country. Not only that, most important to us, of course, it's got a very big charter fleet. It's about 30 boats in all. Well, today we're going to go out on the Crafty Quay with Barry Hoskins. Well, we're going to go and try a wreck, but we're not too sure what the weather's like outside. Hopefully we'll be able to get a few miles off where the big pollack are. Anyway, time will tell. As we steam slowly out of Sutton Harbour, we debated whether the seas would be calm enough to fish and whether the pollock would be feeding. The skipper took us way across Plymouth Sound and we discussed the day's tactics, and as we left the breakwater behind us, we had about an hour to steam to the wreck. Well, when you're fishing over a wreck, most of the times we use artificial rubber eels. Well, there are three principal ones that are used. The most popular are the red gills. Now, these have been around for many years, probably about 20. They were first brought out in Cornwall. And this blunt tail, I think, is what makes all the difference to the catches, because that vibrates through the water, and I think the fish pick that up, and they think it's an injured fish. Another very popular type is the Eddystone eel. That one's produced in Plymouth. Likewise with the red gills, they come in a variety of colours and a variety of sizes. Now you can see here the small ones. Strangely enough, the small ones seem to be working particularly well this year. They're catching as many big fish as the larger eels. Now there's always new types coming on the market. Now delta eels, also from Plymouth, have brought out a new one called a scallywag. Lovely name that, isn't it? But that's slightly different in that it's got two tails, but it still has this sort of squared off end, which probably causes vibration in the water. They also catch a lot of fish, but they're quite new, and I haven't tried them very often yet to prove how successful they will be. But I'm told by anglers who have already got them that their catches are quite good. As I said, a range of colours. The choice is yours, but the most popular are red and black. That one?
Yeah, that'll be fine, Ted, yeah.
As I tackled up, I asked the others what was the successful colour the previous day.
There's fish marking there, lads. Tight into the wreck.
I'm in. Oh, it's a good one. Feels all right. One thing you've got to be careful about, when a pollock takes on the first take, my goodness, that first dive, it's incredible. Oh, it's exhilarating though, my goodness. Oh, look at that. Oh, some power there. Because we're fishing in deep water and with that big tail, you have to keep make sure you keep your clutch about right. He's coming up clear of the wreck now. Oh. I'm not so sure how big he is, but there was certainly some power there to start with. Oh. There he is. This is what pollock fishing is all about over a wreck. Oh, dear, dear. Oh, look at the way he goes. Line going out. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're winning now. Get him, oh, I don't know. Yeah, let's get him over halfway and he begins to flag. Gone. A quick look at my trace and I was able to see that it had chafed on the wreck. One of the hazards, I'm afraid, of fishing over rusting iron. Good one there? Well done. Whet your appetite for the day. Not a terribly big one, Colin, but at least the first fish of the day.
Yes, very nice.
What were you using?
Black, well, Mr. Twister.
So that's his favourite at the moment. So I'm trying a red, somebody else is trying a yellow, and there's somebody on a live eel, I think. So interesting, but I think there's any bigger ones down there on this particular wreck.
So. I certainly hope so.
Should be, shouldn't there?
Yes.
Anyway, Barry's taking us back for another drift. Should be right in a minute, eh? Right. To avoid tangles and a waste of a drop, make sure you hold your trace out straight and that the boom is not twisted around the main line. Well, certainly a long way down. In fact, just looked on the meter, 37 fathoms, so a lot of line goes out. Let it down under control, of course, just keep your thumb on the line, otherwise it'll all bunch up. You must let it down under control so that your reel doesn't tangle up. The long booms we use keeps it away from the main line. Right, now we're at the business end. Now you have to wind up as soon as you hit the bottom, keep the lure moving, and the thing to do is to count the number of turns, and when the pollock takes, you'll know roughly the height that they're fishing, and then each time you'll know roughly when you're going to get a bite and not to go too many winds past that point. Then you let it all the way back down to the bottom again and start all over again. And when you're winding, don't keep it going at one speed all the time. Vary it slightly. Because if you think about it, the fish darts in the water, so you want to make your reel dart a little bit. That way you might well attract the fish. Another important thing to remember is when you get a bite, and it's not on, don't stop winding. Keep coming at the same speed that you're going at that particular moment. Because the pollock will come 3, 4, 5 times sometimes before it eventually takes it. If you stop, you stop. It's back to the bottom, and there we go again. As I said, keep it going, but don't keep it too even. Just make it jump through the water, make it dart. Mine is a difficult day today. We've got a very strong wind at the moment. It's now almost slack water, and Barry's having trouble getting us in the right position because the boat is actually drifting across the wreck, across it instead of down and across it. The wind is taking us across the tide. It's not easy at all.
Come on, lads, wind up.
The freshening offshore wind made it a wet trip back to more sheltered water. Well, not so deep here because we've had to move. The wind has freshened considerably and it was getting quite rough out there. In fact, it was unbearable. We had a job to keep our feet. But what we've done, we've moved into the Eddystone Reef. That's a long reef of rocks. But there's very high pinnacles here. Principle of fishing is exactly the same as it was over the wreck, because some of these pinnacles will come up almost as high as the wrecks we've been on today. So we start winding and we hope to catch a few pollock. The only difference, of course, is that the pollock aren't as big, unfortunately. Oh, and I'm into one straight away. How's that? Oh, he's not not like the one I lost. Oh, still, it's a fish. Remember, even these small ones, or smaller ones, very powerful fish. You have to keep the clutch about right. Oh, he wants to get back there down to the rocks again. There you are. Little pollock there. Nice long trace. As I said, no size to these, but my goodness, they give you some sport. Thank you, Barry. As you can see, they're lovely fish, very streamlined, and you can see that very wide tail. That's where it gets the power when it's diving down. Now, perhaps if you could just see the lateral line that runs along there, when it gets there, it goes up and over and goes up towards the eye. That denotes that it's the pollock. If it was a coalfish, that lateral line would go straight along, and where my thumb is there, that's roughly where it would stop. Because quite often they're not very dark, sometimes the colours are very similar. And of course, on another identification point with the pollock, if you can just see on the mouth, the lower lip on the pollock is longer than the top lip. That is another telltale sign. Not so many on this strip, was there? No, I wish it was. What's that, a peg, Barry? Yeah, that's a good size, isn't it, for a reef?
It is, yes.
It can be a pest sometimes, can't they?
It can be, yeah. Popeyes, we call them.
Well, that's right, yeah. Shows even how deep the water is here, doesn't it?
Yes, for the eyes.
The pop like that.
Okay. You in there?
Well, the end rig is quite simple. What you do need is a boom, and it needs to be up to 12, 14 inches long, really, as a minimum. The reason for that is to keep the trace away from your main line. So because you're letting it down into deep water and you're reeling up and dropping it back. If you don't do that, it's going to wind round the main line and you're going to be in an awful state. Well, French boom is fixed on quite easy. You all probably know how to do that. Just make a loop in your line and then you just wind it round and round the triangle and then just put the last loop over that ring there and it pull the whole thing tight and it stands straight out from the line. Very simple. If you want to change it, take it off or move it up and down the line to get it further away from the weight, very simple to do. I modified mine and put a link swivel on the end. Below the French boom, about 2 feet, a link swivel and whatever weight is needed according to the tide. At the moment I'm using 6 ounces. Now other booms still available and useful. That's one, that's a proprietary branded one. The Eddystone, which is quite good. The line goes all the way down through. The weight fixes right onto the bottom of that one. Keeps your line away. I'd like to see it a little bit longer. They do different lengths. But some of my friends on board today make their own. Now about that. That's got to be 2 foot long. These are made of stainless steel. Again with a link swivel on the end. Excellent, they work extremely well. They say especially when there's a slack tide, the line stays well away from your main line. So there's another thought. I prefer that type, they prefer this. It's what fishing's all about, isn't it? Whatever you find suits you. Right, well, we're using sand eels now. We've moved in onto the reef. Not too big. Now they're easy to put on. If you take your hook and you put it through the bottom lip, pull the hook right through, and about the length of the shank of your hook, just nick it carefully into the belly of the eel, and it holds out underneath and holds the eel out. That, I think, is one of the better ways of hooking sand eel. It allows the eel to swim quite freely in the water. And another thing that I think it does is because the line is coming out from the mouth of the eel, when it's on sand, it can't bury into the bottom. It doesn't apply, of course, on rock, but if you're using it over sand, it just cannot get back into the sand or the mud. Well, Colin's just caught a cuckoo wrasse. Now they're very attractive. I think they're one of the prettiest fish that live on the reefs. This is a copfish. You can see all the bright colours. See the blue running down from its eye? Runs down about halfway along its body, and then it turns into sort of a goldy colour. Beautiful. That lovely red dorsal fin that starts off very deep, rich blue. Very attractive fish. They don't get very big. I suppose this one's about half size. The biggest I've seen is about 2 pounds, so they don't get very big, but just have a look at those teeth there. They don't hurt you, but it just shows what they feed on. They must live on little shellfish that live on the rocks and anemones. Very beautiful fish. Let's just put him back before he dies. Yeah, go on, my beauty. There he goes, straight down to the bottom. Lovely. He survived. Beautiful. Not worth keeping fish like that. Very pretty fish, and you can eat them. Just as well put them back. Reef fish are usually smaller, but being smaller, they're usually very lively, and there's a lot more of them. One of the pleasures for me of fishing Start Bay is the trip down the River Dart, in all that beautiful scenery and those lovely old buildings. Well, I've joined Pat Farley, skipper of the Masker, and is this a good omen? Youngsters on the rocks catching garfish. Two of my pals are joining us today. They're in an Orkney bass hunter. Well, the trip out from the mouth of the river is about 20 minutes. Well, the first thing we have to do is catch a few mackerel because we need to have mackerel strip. But just a quickie, a tip. A lead weight, when mackerel are scarce, quite often it pays to make your lead shiny. Perhaps just a silly thing, but it's something I do quite a lot. Just take the back of your knife and just scrape it, and just to make it shine in strips up and down the weight, just like that. So all you need to do, when that drops through the water, that seems to flash. And if there's not many mackerel about, sometimes you'll catch the odd one. Very useful. I wonder how a job to see him, feel him. 4. Oh, that's better. That's what it should be. Well, peeler crab is the most popular bait. That's the humble harbour crab. It's either the greenback or the red belly, as some people call them. Now, a lot of children, especially, don't exactly know what a peeler crab is. Well, it's the crab when it's at the state that it's going to shed its shell, because the shell is its bone, it's its skeleton. So to grow, it has to shed that shell. It does that 2 or 3 times a year. Now, to use them, what you do is you lift the old shell off, and then underneath you can see the new shell growing. Now, at this point, I always give, if you give a squeeze there hard, then that kills the crab, because we don't want to give it any suffering, do we? Now, take off all the legs and the claws, take it all off, clean it, make sure there's no shell left. I find that, or I think anyway, that there's a piece of shell left, that might dissuade the fish. If it bites and it finds it's hard, he might just, he's a bit finicky, just let it go. Now, out of that you can make 2, sometimes 3, depends on the size of the crab. But normally all I do is take the crab and I just cut it in half, and you've got 2 very nice baits. Right, there, that's that. And don't forget the legs and the claws. You don't throw those away. While you're waiting for a bite, you can sit and just peel those, because don't forget, you don't always have to sit and hold your rod. I find that quite often you can lose a place, you can strike too quick. So to make sure I don't do that, I quite often just leave mine leaning against a rail, because they suck it down. Now, you need to tip them, we find. You can use it on its own, pieces of strips of mackerel or strips of squid, but you do need to keep it very thin. So take the fillet off as thin as you can. And if you think it's, I won't do this one, but if you think it's too much flesh, take a bit more flesh off, and then just take a nice thin fillet, or strip, whichever you like to call it, of mackerel like that. And when you've got the crab on the hook, just put your hook through one end, and it waves in the tide. It's a double attractor. It always seems to work. If you've got 2 or 3 anglers fishing together, those who are using strip will outfish those who are not. But when you're drifting over banks, much like the Skerries, which is a 5-mile stretch of sand going right the way down to Start Point, they're pitted with very deep pits that go down as much as 30 fathoms in odd places. So the fish seem to be over the lips when the tide is running strong. And to get at them, the best way is to drift fish. This is what we're doing now. And to do that successfully, your end gear needs to be a long flowing trace. Well, the end gear, of course, is the most important. So start with a boom and a weight. Now I prefer to use the watch type leads. 3 or 4 ounces is usually sufficient. That I find scuffs up the sand and it makes an attractor, at least I think it makes an attractor. It may help bring fish to find out what's causing it. Then about 18 inches to 2 foot piece of nylon to a swivel, then on to my first hook trace. Now you can, if you like, put a treble swivel there, but I prefer not to because I think this is slightly lighter and for me it seems to work better. I think it has a bit more action. I use 2 beads which trap an ordinary swivel and I keep them in position with a stop knot either side of the beads, a little bit of super glue on. That trace is about 15 to 18 inches. Beads above the hook, yellow or red, those are my favourites, or a mix of each. And size 1 wire hook. And then go right on down to the bottom one. And again, a size 1 and 4 or 5 beads. Overall length can be as long as you can get away with the length of rod that you're using. You want to be at least 10 or 12 feet, maybe 15 feet. Traces of that length seem to catch more place than the other types. Now, rod, keep it as light as you can, you get much more sport. This is a 12-pound test curve. I'm using that today because there's the odd turbot about, but quite often I only fish with a bass rod, and I find that I get plenty of sport with that. Reel for your own choice, a multiplier by far the best. Keep it small, load it with 12 or 15-pound line, quite adequate, and give you plenty of sport. Right, when you let your line over the side with these long traces, make sure the trace goes out on the tide before you let your weight down, then it doesn't get tangled around the main line. Let it down under control, because we're not very deep on these particular banks, so we're in about 13 or 14 meters at the moment. When it hits the bottom, I always like to just take the strain and sort of hold it back a bit just to make sure that the trace has gone out into the tide. Then I let out some more line. As the boat drifts down, I usually let it back about 20 yards, something like that, maybe 30. And you get a nice angle then as you're fishing. And your weight just bumps along over the sand and over the ripples, hopefully fluffing up a bit of sand, and track the place. Oh, first one. Alright, so place, well, not very big, Pat. It's a fish. Right. Grand job. Yeah. Well, that's what it's all about. We're trying to catch a few of those today, and anything else that might be down there. Well, he's small, smaller than we would like to get out here. Yeah, about 1.25 pounds, I suppose, something like that. Nice and fat, good condition, nice bright spots on it. Attractive fish place. Oh, well done, Pat. Oh, is it? Hey? Oh, don't need a net for that. Oh.
You can go back that one.
I think your dad's bigger than he is.
Right, yeah.
Going to put him back?
Yep.
Right. Identifying fish can often be a problem, especially with flatfish. But when you've got a place, it's not a problem usually. You've got lovely bright orange spots, and the fish is very smooth. Run your finger either way. Absolutely smooth. Get a dab, and they do fluctuate in colour. You get dull orange spots sometimes, and the shades of brown can be different. If you get your finger and just run it from its tail to its head, it's like sandpaper. Do that and it's absolutely smooth. It's not foolproof, but it's one way of telling exactly whether it's a dab or a place. Slack water gave me the opportunity to go aboard the Orkney Bass Hunter. Well, the average size of boat used by most anglers is sort of 17 to 21 foot, much like the Orkney boat we've got here today. Very popular. But finding a suitable anchor is not always quite as easy. You think just buy an anchor and drop it over the side and everything's okay. But I've found differently, like most people, not every anchor you buy will do the job, especially when there's a bit of wind and a strong tide. So let's have a quick look at the different anchors that are available and which ones might be more suited to your needs. First of all is the traditional fisherman's anchor. And we all know what they look like and what they are. Not all that efficient. They work in hard ground, shingle, in sand, not very good at all. Another one on the market now, slightly different shape, is the Bruce anchor. That's the smallest one they do. You would probably want the next size up for a boat of this size. Note the shape here. That's supposed to scoop up the sand. And I understand that they work quite efficiently. But depending on the seabed, it depends how efficient they are. Sometimes if it's very soft sand, it does build up in here, I understand. But people I know that have got them swear by those. Then another one that's just come on the market. Now I've tried this one out on my own boat. This is the Delta from Simpson & Lawrence. It's much in the same shape, I suppose, as a CQR, but it's welded solidly here. The shank is rigid and stays at the right angles there completely. Underneath, they've got the weight to the point. Now that really does dig in. But like the Bruce, they're quite expensive. That's the smallest one they do. That's a 14-pound anchor. Now another one that's just arrived for me to have a look at, and I must admit not having tried this one out, so it only arrived today, but I can see already that the flukes go down. There's quite a gap there, so that's going to work quite efficiently. Now you might ask me what the port and starboard balls are for on the end. Well, that confused me at first. I have checked it out. There's nothing more than to protect your boat, so that when you're pulling your anchor or letting it drop quickly, it won't damage the size of the boat. But more important, if the anchor lands on the seabed on its side, it won't stick in the mud. It'll automatically fall over. So, but that, strangely enough, it's quite a cheap anchor. It's as cheap as, or almost as cheap as a fisherman's to buy. Now, another good standby, it's a grapnel. Easy to stow, works quite efficiently really. It's good standby anchor that. I think if you get into any trouble on a boat, you've got one of those, you're going to be able to help yourself and stand still with that, I think, as long as you've got some chain on it. Now last of all, just for your own use, make one of these up. You want to go fishing over the rocks, get a sash weight, some heavy iron steel, get it welded on the bottom with a ring so you can make it into a trip, and you can bend those into any shape you like. And it doesn't matter if you lose it. It costs you £1 or so, and if you've got a friend who's a welder, it won't cost you anything. That's a better one, Pat, isn't it? Great. Oh yeah, getting bigger. Yep. Yeah, that's a nice one. It's getting close to £1.75, £2, that one. Nice fat fish. And just look at those nice rich colours on them. Lovely.
Okay lads, get the tackle up, let's go up and have another drift.
One of the secrets of success when drift fishing is to make short drifts. When you catch a few fish, go back and make the same drift again. another place, a little small place. Is that yours? No, well done. After a pleasant day's fishing, it was back up the River Dart to our mooring. It's been a glorious day. I'm sure we've all enjoyed it. It's what drift fishing is all about. Just look at the results. 13th place, a dab, and 3 gurnards. That's got to be good. Why don't you try it sometime? That's a goodie. Brixham is the oldest fishing port in the country. In fact, they have the largest beamer fleet there is afloat today. But more important for the anglers, it was here that wreck fishing all began, and that was back in the early 60s. Today we're going out on the Sea Spray with Vic Evans. And earlier this year, his skipper Tony Welsh caught a conger of just over 100 pounds. I wonder if we'll top that. Well, our first stop was just off Berry Head in the deep water to catch a few mackerel for bait. Got one.
It's a start.
Well, there's another hour or so to the wreck, and we discuss the day's tactics and wondering whether the sea will be calm enough for us to anchor up. You can see, even with the crabber there, quite a sea running close inshore.
Let it go there.
Well, bait for conger is basically mackerel. There's lots of different ways you can show it. You can use more or less a whole mackerel. Just fillet it out and take the bone out so that it flaps. Another variation, you take the head and the tail off, cut that into shapes. Again, it flaps around in the tide. Some people seem to think that it looks a bit like a squid. Straight mackerel fillets. You can use a whole mackerel, just take the tail off, that stops it getting taken and carried and wobbling about in the tide. Vic's favourite, the kebab. Good idea that, because all the guts remain inside and that just drifts away. You thread those on the hook, just like you would a kebab on a skewer. And then the squid. An excellent bait. Caught a lot of fish on those in the past. And now, one part of the bait is often discarded. What's left after you've filleted the mackerel? That's the backbone with the head and the tail and the gut left in. Just put the hook in the mouth and up through the head. It's a cracking bait. We've got scad here. Not quite so good, not in my opinion. A lot of people use them, but there's not very much blood in the scad. Pout whiting, well, that's a natural bait on a wreck, so why not use it? Well, the first thing you've got to do when you get a conger on is to get it away from the wreck, because that's the one point when you might lose it if he gets his tail around something. Once you've got him clear of the wreck, you can let him fight it out then. Make sure your clutch is about right, so that if he does make a sudden dive, you're not going to lose him. Well, that's what we're looking for, but not that size. Well, the rod I'm using is 7'6", and the reel, well, that's a 7,000, and that's loaded with 40 pounds line. Well, it's very deep water here. It's about 30 fathom, so you need to let it down under control. Otherwise, your bait will get tangled up around the main line. Well, earlier in the year, you had a fish almost, what, twice that size? Because that's about 50 pound. You had one of about 100 pound, I believe.
That's right, yeah. 100 pound, 2 ounces.
Yeah, that's great. That's the biggest one ever brought into Brixham, isn't it?
So they tell me.
Yeah. Well, how did that one compare for fighting qualities? So I know that quite often the bigger fish can get lethargic.
Magnificent condition. It's the best fight I've ever had. She came up to about 30 feet below the surface and then dived straight back down 90 feet, which was quite something. She just couldn't hold it. And the drag on my rod is set so tight that 2 blokes can't pull it off.
Yeah.
And that fish took 90 feet away. You saw this one compared with that. This was nothing.
What size, Kev?
Small one. Any small to the small.
I think the small ones down, I get a bite nearly every time I go down. I had quite a hefty bang when he was playing that, but it didn't develop into anything. Well, the trace when you're conger fishing is very important because a conger's got very sharp teeth. Many of you probably know that already from bitter experience. So, wire is the main thing. Now, I like to use a trace around about 18 inches, not more than 2 foot long. Hooks vary. I don't always use the same size. Depends on the type of conger and the size we're getting. That's an 8/0, but sometimes I go down to a 6/0. It really depends on the size of the bait. Because the bigger the hook, the bigger the bait, of course, because you need to disguise the hook. When you put it on, I prefer to put it on with 2 crimps. I usually wind it round the shank, back up through the eye of the hook. I wind it round a couple of times. And I always crimp the swivel end as well. I don't know, sort of a belt and braces job, really. I just like to feel that it's not going to give way on me. Slack water is a time for reflection, I think. It's a time when we get less fish. The boat usually lays a bit awkwardly on the wreck like it is at the moment. It's time for a cup of tea.
New rule today. You gaff your own fish if you caught more than one.
It's nothing special anyway.
Yeah.
Ian. Well done. Oh, this is a different fish. My goodness, this one's going. Twice he's been back down again. Oh. There he is. Oh, thank you, Vic. Oh, a bit more than that. Oh, no, you don't. I'm looking the wrong side. Yeah, 4. Ah.
No. He's about, he's like I said, about 35, 38, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So you can't,
Anyway,
you can't
that's quite nice. 35, 38 pound, we can't really tell, but it's great. Thank you, Vic.
Okay. Here's a blacker.
Well done, young Steve. You saved your reputation. Positioning your boat is probably the most important thing you have to do during the day, because get that wrong and you don't stand a chance of catching a fish. On a day like today, it's a bit difficult because the wind is slightly across the tide and it keeps blowing us off. But even so, you've still got to get it right. What you've got to do is try and get the boat so it lays just up tide of the wreck, so that your bait, when you let it down, goes right in under the wreck, right to the bottom, because that's probably where all the holes and broken parts of the wreck are, and it's where the conger should be lying. And you've got to get your bait right back in there. So you need to have heavy weights. Today we're on around about £1 now to try and keep it down. If the bait flies up off the bottom, you don't seem to get any fish at all. If you look at a wreck, it seems to be a kind of order in which the fish lay around the wreck, because after all, a wreck is a larder. That's where the food is. You've got the smaller fish like pout feeding off of the crustacea, and then you've got the pout, then you've got the congers and the pollack and everything else feeding off those. So it really is a chain. And the way it works is, at the bottom of the wreck, you get the conger, or in the holes and in the superstructure, depending how it lays. Then perhaps a bit higher up again, you get the pollack and the coalfish. Somewhere in between, you get the ling, and of course, close to the bottom, you get the pout. And when there's bream about, they also fish or lay quite close to the bottom. But unfortunately, at the present time, we're not having a very good run of bream, although it's possible to catch the odd big one on your conger bait. If you do, it's probably going to be about £5.
Any size? Everyone can see it. Hey. Nearly.
Yeah, right. So they can get their tail around. There's no way you're going to free it. Oh, that one's away and swimming. I don't think he's all that big. No, he's not all that big. He's shaking his head well. He's not swimming anywhere, he's just shaking his head and wanting to go back to the bottom all the time. Come on, my beauty. I don't think you're all that big now. Yes, he's coming up. I suppose I really ought to say she is coming up because all the big congers are females. Male congers very seldom go much more than about 8 or 9 pounds. And in any case, I don't think we find many males this side of the Atlantic. I think they're mostly the other side. Congers are a bit of a mystery. I think they're like silver eels. I think they go off somewhere like the Sargasso Sea to breed when they eventually breed, because I've never met a skipper or anybody else said, "Ooh, he's going now, cool, all the way back." So I thought it was a small one. No, he isn't all that big, but he's got his head down. Oh, as I was saying, I was really interrupted there. I haven't met anybody yet that's found a conger with rowing. And I've made a few inquiries. Never mind, let's get back to the business in hand. Get this little strap up. I think the trouble is I've probably got somebody else's line in weight. I'm being pulled in under the boat. Here we come. Oh, here he is.
All wind up, please.
Sorry. Oh, we're free, are we? Anyway, I must away. Nice to see you all. Yeah, bye-bye then. Bye.